He threw the folder across the table before she even sat down. 11 months, Gideon Crowell said, and his voice was the kind of quiet that makes a room go cold. 11 months since the bomb, and you're still letting a nurse run this house. He looked around the table at the men who worked for Roman Vaylor, men who had feared Roman for a decade, and he let the silence do its work. A man who can't stand up can't hold this organization together. You all know it. You're just too afraid to say it out loud. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed wrong. Because Roman was sitting right there at the head of the table, and Roman Vaylor had put 3 men in the ground for less. If you had walked into that room and didn't know a single thing about the people inside it, you would have looked at Roman Vaylor last. That's exactly what Gideon was counting on. Subscribe to this channel and hit the like button right now, because this story is going to take you places you didn't expect. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. Don't go anywhere. Roman Calloway Vaylor was 53 years old, and for 26 of those years, he had been the most methodical criminal operator in the Chicago metropolitan area. Not the loudest, not the most violent, the most precise. He kept books that would make an IRS auditor weep with admiration. He ran 12 shell companies, 4 legitimate freight operations, and a network of relationships that extended from the loading docks of Lake Calumet all the way to 3 city council offices. He had never once been indicted. He had never once raised his voice in a business meeting. He believed, with the absolute certainty of a man who has tested the theory repeatedly, that fear was more durable than loyalty and that clarity was more powerful than brutality. Then the car bomb happened, and everything he believed got rewritten in scar tissue. It was a Tuesday in January. Roman had parked in the usual spot behind the Marquette Street freight office, same as he had for 9 years. Whoever built the device knew his schedule down to the minute. The explosion took out both his legs below the knee on the left side, fractured his pelvis in 2 places, and sent fragments of door paneling into his lower back that surgeons spent 11 hours removing. His right leg survived mostly intact, which the doctors called fortunate, and which Roman, during the months of agony that followed, called a specific kind of cruelty, because one functional leg is just enough to remind you constantly of the one that isn't. He spent 6 weeks in a private facility in Oak Park. He spent another 10 weeks in a rehabilitation center in Evanston, where they tried to teach him how to use a wheelchair as though it were a skill and not an insult. He came home to his estate on the North Shore in late spring, and by August he had fired 11 nurses. The reasons were varied. The first one kept a pitying expression on her face that Roman found intolerable. The second one talked too much about her previous patients. The third one touched his arm without being asked, which he considered a boundary violation. Numbers 4 through 7 committed a rotating series of similar offenses: excessive gentleness, unprompted encouragement, the specific brand of professional cheerfulness that Roman associated with being managed rather than treated. Number 8 stole a watch. Numbers 9 and 10 were simply incompetent. Number 11 had the misfortune of being assigned on the same morning that Roman discovered his head of logistics had been skimming, and she was in the room when he made the phone call, and that was enough. By October, Marcus, his head of security, had stopped filing the nursing agency paperwork between dismissals and simply refiled the same candidate pool. That was when Nora Bellamy's name came up again. She had been on the list the first time around, flagged by the agency as highly qualified but described, in careful professional language, as direct in her patient interactions, which was the sort of phrase that usually meant difficult. Roman had passed on her then. He had not wanted difficult. 8 months later, Marcus argued that Roman had gone through 11 nurses who weren't difficult, and that perhaps difficult was worth trying. Roman said nothing, which Marcus had learned over 14 years to interpret as reluctant agreement. Nora Bellamy showed up 22 minutes late. Her car, a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked front bumper and a passenger side mirror held on with electrical tape, died at the iron gates of the estate at 9:48 in the morning. Not sputtered, died. The engine simply stopped, the way a conversation stops when someone says something true in a room full of liars. She sat in it for a moment, looked at the dashboard, said something to herself that the security camera audio didn't pick up, and then climbed out with a canvas bag over one shoulder and walked the last 12 feet to the intercom on foot. Marcus buzzed her in without comment. She was wearing scrubs, dark green, washed so many times the color had gone soft at the elbows, beneath a denim jacket 2 sizes too large that had a coffee stain on the left cuff. She was 38 years old, with the kind of face that kept its own counsel. Brown eyes that didn't perform warmth, but also didn't perform toughness. Dark hair pulled back efficiently. She walked through the estate's front entrance the way people walk through places they've decided aren't going to intimidate them, which is different from the way people walk when they're actually not intimidated. The difference is in the set of the jaw. She was brought to Roman's study. Roman was behind his desk in the wheelchair, and he was dressed, as he always was, with a precision that bordered on aggression. Charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie. Everything tailored to account for how he sat. Because one thing Roman Vaylor had never permitted himself was to look like a man whose clothes didn't fit. He was reading something when she came in, and he didn't look up immediately, which was a test he ran on everyone, watching how long it took them to fill silence with something unnecessary. Nora didn't fill it. She walked to the empty chair across from his desk and set her bag down on the floor. Then she waited. Then she reached out and picked up the crystal glass that was sitting on the edge of his desk, the one with an inch of water in it from this morning, and she misjudged the weight of it entirely because she wasn't expecting leaded crystal, and it slipped from her hand and hit the floor and exploded into 8 irregular pieces. There was a pause. Roman looked up. Nora looked at the shards, then at him, then at the wet patch spreading across his rug. "You need to get someone in here to blot that before it sets," she said. "Wool?" Roman looked at the rug. "Yes." "Salt water. Cold. Don't let them rub it." She sat down. "I'm sorry about the glass. It was irreplaceable." "Okay." She didn't expand on that. She pulled a notepad from her bag. "I've read your intake file. I want to go through your current medication schedule before I look at your physical status, because the file your last provider submitted is inconsistent in 3 places, and I need to know which version of it is accurate." Roman studied her for a moment. "I was trying to locate the performance, the nervousness dressed up as confidence, the rehearsed professionalism. He couldn't find it. She was just sitting there with a notepad and a coffee stain on her jacket, waiting for him to answer. "The dosage on the neuropathic management has been adjusted twice in the last 6 weeks," he said. "By whom?" "By me." She wrote something. "What prompted the adjustments?" "The original dosage made me feel—" He stopped. He didn't finish sentences like that out loud. He started again. "The side effects were unacceptable." "Which ones?" The flatness of the question was what got him. Not, "I'm sorry to hear that." Not that's very common with this medication. Just which ones, the way a mechanic asks which noise the engine is making. "Cognitive fog," he said, after a moment, "and a tremor in my right hand that interfered with my work." She wrote that down. "Your work?" "Yes." "What do you do?" "Logistics," Roman said, which was true the way most true things are true, accurately but incompletely. Nora looked up at him for the first time directly, held it for 2 seconds, then looked back at her notepad. "Okay. The tremor. Does it follow the dose, or is it present throughout the day?" "It varies. Morning or evening worse." "Morning." "Have you told your neurologist?" Roman was quiet for a beat. "You haven't," she said. It wasn't a question. "The neurologist works out of Northwestern. The information that moves through that office moves through people I don't control." She put her pen down. She looked at him straight. "So you've been adjusting your own medication for a traumatic neurological injury without medical supervision because you're concerned about privacy?" "Yes." "Okay," she said, and picked her pen back up. "We're going to fix that. I have a colleague who consults privately, no institutional affiliation, whose discretion I can speak to directly. You'll meet with him once. If you decide you don't trust him, we find another option. But you don't get to keep self-adjusting without oversight, because what you're doing right now isn't managing your condition, it's gambling with it." The room was quiet. Marcus, who was standing near the door, had the expression of a man watching someone walk across thin ice and somehow not falling through. Roman said, "You're telling me what I don't get to do." "I'm telling you what you've been doing isn't working," Nora said. "The tremor in the morning, the fog, those aren't the medication failing. Those are symptoms of dose timing being wrong. That's a fixable problem, but only if someone with actual training is making the adjustments." She paused. "I'm not trying to run your life. I'm trying to do the job you're apparently paying double market rate for." Roman looked at her. For the first time since January, someone had spoken to him the way people used to speak to him before the explosion. Not around the disability, not in careful proximity to it, but straight through it, at him, as though he were still entirely present. He had not realized, until that moment, how loudly the absence of that had been. "Who negotiated your rate?" he said. "Your man Marcus." She glanced toward the door without turning her head. He seemed motivated. Marcus, near the door, said nothing and looked at the middle distance. "Tell me about the medication inconsistency," Roman said. She spent an hour and 40 minutes in that first session. She went through his medication file with the kind of attention Roman usually reserved for financial discrepancies, catching not just the 3 inconsistencies she'd flagged, but a 4th that turned out to be a transcription error from the rehabilitation facility. She asked questions about his sleep without framing them as concern. She asked about his pain levels using a numerical scale, and when he said 6, she wrote 6. She didn't tell him that was a lot, or that she was sorry. She asked if she could examine the injury sites, and when he said yes, she examined them with the methodical attention of someone looking for information rather than reacting to what she found. What she found was not good. The skin around the left prosthetic interface was showing early signs of pressure damage that hadn't been documented in 6 weeks, which meant the previous nurse had either missed it or hadn't been looking. There was a section of his lower back where scar tissue had contracted in a way that was limiting his range of motion more than it should have been at this stage of recovery, and nobody had started the manual therapy that would address it. His blood pressure, which she checked twice, was running higher than his file suggested it should be. She documented everything without editorializing. At the end, she closed her notepad, put her pen in her bag, and said, "You've been managing this alone." "I manage everything alone," Roman said. "That's not a virtue," she said. "It's just a habit." She stood up. "I'll be here at 7 tomorrow morning. I need an hour before your day starts. If your schedule changes, Marcus has my number." She picked up her bag. She was almost at the door when Roman said, "You didn't apologize again for the glass." Nora stopped. "Thought about that." "No," she said. "I didn't." And she left. Roman sat alone in his study for a while after that. The wet patch on the rug was going to leave a mark, probably. The crystal was gone. 11 months of being handled carefully by people who saw a wounded man first and a person second, and then this woman walked in with a coffee stain on her cuff and talked to him like he was still the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He pressed the intercom on his desk. Marcus picked up immediately. "She's hired," Roman said, a pause. "I'll call the agency. And get someone in here for the rug. Cold water, salt. Don't let them rub it." He released the intercom and sat with the quiet for another minute. Then he opened his laptop and pulled up a file he'd had compiled 3 weeks ago when Nora Bellamy's name had first reappeared on the candidate list. He had ordered the background check the same day, the way he ordered background checks on everyone who moved through his orbit. Standard procedure. Necessary discipline. The file on Nora was clean. No criminal record, no financial entanglements, an expired lease on an apartment in Pilsen, and a current address in a friend's spare room in Logan Square, $11 in her checking account as of the most recent poll, and an eviction notice that had been filed and then suspended when she paid the outstanding amount in a lump sum 6 weeks ago. That last detail had caught Roman's attention when he first read it, because the lump sum was larger than what a nurse made in 2 weeks, and the timing didn't match any deposit from her employer. But it was the last item in the file that mattered. Her brother, Danny Bellamy, 31 years old, 3 minor priors, currently 4 months behind on a debt to a collection operation that ran out of a dry cleaning front in Bridgeport. The collection operation that ran out of the dry cleaning front in Bridgeport was owned by a company that was owned by a company that was owned by Roman Vaylor. He had known this the day the file arrived. He had known it when he agreed to interview her. He had known it while she sat across his desk and told him what he didn't get to do. He closed the laptop. Outside, the lake was flat and gray, and the November light was doing nothing to help it. Roman Vaylor was a precise man. He believed that information was power, and that power was best held quietly. He had not told Nora Bellamy about her brother's debt. He had not told her that he already knew, before she walked through his door, that her family was entangled in his organization's operations. What he had not yet decided, and this was new because Roman Vaylor made decisions quickly and held them, was what to do with that fact. He told himself it was simply another variable, another piece of information to manage. He told himself this carefully, The way a man tells himself something he suspects isn't entirely true. The crystal lay in pieces on the floor beside the wet rug. Marcus had not yet sent anyone to clean it up. The crystal stayed on the floor until 7 the next morning. Roman had told Marcus to leave it. He didn't know why exactly. He wasn't a sentimental man, and he didn't operate on symbolism. But something about the way it lay there in 8 uneven pieces on the wool rug felt like information he wasn't ready to discard yet. Marcus had learned, over 14 years, not to question the things Roman left where they were. Nora arrived at 6:58. She didn't comment on the crystal. She set her bag down, pulled out her blood pressure cuff, and said, "Sit still," which was not a request. Roman, who had not been told to sit still by anyone in approximately a decade, sat still. She wrapped the cuff around his arm with the efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times and doesn't think about it anymore, and she watched the gauge the way he watched spreadsheets, looking for the number that didn't belong. The number didn't belong. "Higher than yesterday," she said. "I slept poorly." "When do you sleep well?" He thought about it honestly, which surprised him. "March," he said. "Before the—" He stopped. "Before January," she said, not filling it in wrong, just placing it accurately. "Yes." She made a note. She didn't tell him that was understandable. She didn't tell him that trauma affects sleep cycles, which he already knew, or that he should consider speaking to someone, which he would never do. She just wrote the number down and moved to the next thing, and the absence of management in it was the thing that kept catching him off guard about her, like reaching for a step that isn't there and finding solid ground instead. She spent 40 minutes on his physical status. The pressure damage near the prosthetic interface she cleaned and dressed with a focus that was almost aggressive, leaning in close, her hands certain and quick. She found a knot of scar tissue along his lower left back that she worked at with her thumbs, while he sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the wall and said nothing. Because saying nothing was easier than acknowledging how much it hurt, and she seemed to understand that without being told. "This should have been addressed in month 2, she said. Not an accusation, a fact. Month 2, I was in Evanston. The rehab facility didn't do manual therapy on this? They attempted it. Attempted. I asked them to stop." She paused in what she was doing, just briefly. "Why?" Roman looked at the wall. "Because I didn't want anyone touching me." She resumed the pressure, steady and deliberate. "Okay," she said. That was all. No unpacking of it, no exploration of what it meant, no careful pivot toward the emotional content underneath. Just okay. And the continued work of her hands on damaged tissue, which was in its own way the most respectful response she could have given him. When she was done, she stood up and washed her hands at the bathroom sink, and Roman pulled his shirt back down and straightened his jacket, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "The colleague I mentioned," she said, drying her hands. "The neurologist. He can come here. Thursday afternoon, if your schedule allows." "What's his name?" "Harlan Fitch. He was at Rush for 12 years. He left to consult privately about 4 years ago." She came back into the bedroom. "He's not going to talk about you. Not because I asked him not to, but because his entire practice is built on people who can't afford to be talked about." Roman looked at her. "You've used him before." "I've referred patients to him before." "What kind of patients?" She held his eyes. "The kind that value discretion." It was the first moment of direct acknowledgement between them. Not of who he was or what he ran, but of the fact that they both understood there was something there to acknowledge. It passed quickly, the way those moments do when neither party is ready to make it permanent. "Thursday," Roman said. She nodded and picked up her bag. "I want a full status report on the back injury by end of week," he said. "Documented. What the damage is. What the treatment timeline looks like. What outcomes are realistic." She looked at him with something that was almost amusement but hadn't made it all the way there. "You want a report?" "I want information organized in a way I can use it." "I'll have it by Thursday," she said, and left. Roman sat in the quiet of his bedroom for a moment after the door closed. Then he called Marcus. "Get me everything current on Nora Bellamy," he said. The report came back by afternoon. Nora Bellamy was not a sophisticated man. He was 31 years old, worked intermittently as a line cook at 2 different restaurants in Pilsen, had a history of small debts that he paid late and sometimes not at all, and had gotten sideways with the Bridgeport dry cleaning operation, which everyone in Roman's network called simply the dryer, 8 months ago over a loan that had started at $4,000 and was now sitting at 9,200 with accumulated interest and a late penalty that had been applied twice. $9,200 was not a significant number in the context of Roman Vaylor's operations. It was the kind of number that got resolved in one of three ways. The debtor paid, the debtor arranged to work it off, or the people who ran the dryer made a visit that left the debtor in a condition designed to encourage the first two options. The dryer was run day to day by a man named Carl Pietra, who reported to a lieutenant named Gideon Crowell. Roman had known Gideon Crowell for 11 years. He had promoted him 4 times. He had trusted him with the eastern side of the freight operation and with 3 accounts that required a particular kind of careful management. Gideon was smart, patient, and had never once in 11 years done anything that Roman could point to as disloyal, which was, Roman had recently begun to think, its own kind of data point. He called Carl Pietra directly, which was unusual enough that Carl picked up on the first ring and said nothing, waiting. "The Bellamy account," Roman said. A pause. "Yeah. What's the current status?" $9,200. He's made 2 partial payments. Piece together maybe 800 of it. Carl's voice was carefully neutral, the way voices go when the person speaking is trying to read the temperature of the conversation before they commit to a position. "We were going to schedule a visit next week. 3rd one. Cancel it." Silence. "The account stays open," Roman said. "No visits, no contact. I want it flagged to me directly if anything changes." "Does Gideon know you're—" "I'm telling you," Roman said, not asking what Gideon knows. Carl said, "Yes, sir," quickly, and that was the end of that call. Roman set the phone down and looked at the window. He told himself this was operational management. He had assets and liabilities in his organization that intersected with his household in ways that required active monitoring. Nora Bellamy's brother was a liability in his network, and active monitoring of that situation was simply responsible practice. He told himself this carefully. Then he opened a separate file on his laptop, the one he kept encrypted, the one that Marcus didn't have full access to, and he started a new section. He labeled it simply GC Ma. Gideon Crowell came to the estate on a Wednesday. He came twice a month, usually, for the operational briefings that Roman had been conducting by video call since the explosion and had recently moved back to in-person. He drove himself, which he always did, in a black Audi that he parked with precision in the same spot every time, and he walked into Roman's study with the ease of a man who has been coming to a place long enough that it no longer impresses him. He was 50 years old, lean in the way that men get lean when they never fully relax, with gray at his temples and eyes the color of old concrete. He dressed well but not expensively, good wool, conservative cuts, nothing that would attract attention in either direction. He sat across from Roman's desk the way he always did, one ankle crossed over the opposite knee, a leather portfolio open on his lap, and he went through the operational update with the efficiency of someone who has prepared thoroughly and expects to be listened to carefully. Roman listened. He also watched. This was not new. Roman had always watched the people he relied on, looking for the tells that preceded problems. But since January, since the explosion that had taken his legs and not his mind, he had started watching differently, more slowly, with more patience for the small things, the micro-expressions, the moments when a person said one word and their body suggested a different one. Gideon, going through freight manifests and collection reports, was flawless. That was the problem. Nobody was flawless. Roman had been in this business long enough to know that. Everyone had a tell, a hesitation, a place where the performance of confidence dropped for half a second, and the actual person showed through. Gideon had none of those, had never had them in 11 years. And Roman, who had once read this as exceptional discipline, was now reading it as something else. He wasn't sure what yet. "The dryer numbers are down this quarter," Roman said during a pause in the briefing. Gideon nodded. "Seasonal. October through December always pulls back. January recovers. Carl tells me there are 3 accounts in arrears past 90 days. 2 of them are making partial payments. The 3rd one," Gideon glanced at the portfolio. "Bellamy, we have a visit scheduled next week." Roman said, "Cancel it." Gideon looked up. The look lasted a fraction of a second too long. "The account's at 9,200. I know what it's at. If we don't follow through on the 3rd visit, the other accounts read it as I said cancel it, Roman said, and his voice had the quality it got when the conversation was over, whether the other person had finished or not. Gideon closed the portfolio. Okay. He paused. Can I ask why? No. Another pause, shorter. Okay, Gideon said again, and opened the portfolio back up and moved on to the next item. Roman watched his face through the rest of the meeting. Gideon gave him nothing. When the meeting was done and Gideon had gone, Marcus came into the study and stood near the door with the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a while and is waiting to be asked. Say it, Roman. Gideon made 2 calls from the car before he drove out, Marcus said. We don't have the audio. We have the numbers. Roman held out his hand. Marcus gave him a folded piece of paper. The first number was a Chicago area code Roman recognized as belonging to Carl Pietra. The second number he didn't recognize at all. He memorized both, folded the paper, and handed it back. Find me the second number, he said. Marcus nodded and left. Roman sat with the quiet for a while. Outside, the Audi's taillights had long since disappeared down the drive. The lake was doing what it did in November, sitting heavy and dark, pressing against the light at the edge of the property like it wanted in. He thought about the bombing in January. He thought about who had known his schedule precisely enough to build a device around it. He thought about 11 years of flawless performance. Nora noticed something was different on Thursday morning. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, sideways, without making it the subject of attention, the way you track a change in a room without staring at the thing that changed. Roman was present but compartmentalized, going through her examination and the meeting with Harlan Fitch with the focused compliance of a man who has decided to cooperate with a process and is executing that decision, rather than actually being in the room. Harlan Fitch was a small man in his mid-50s with large glasses and the particular manner of someone who has spent decades delivering difficult information and has made peace with the silence that follows it. He examined Roman for 40 minutes, asked questions that Roman answered honestly. Nora had apparently prepared him for this because he answered without the editing he'd done in the first session. And then he sat back and said, "The dose timing is the central problem. Everything downstream of that is manageable if we address that first." Roman said, "How long?" "To stabilize the timing, 3 weeks if we do this correctly. The tremor should reduce within 10 days if the new schedule holds. And if it doesn't, then we adjust again," Harlan said, with the simplicity of someone who has never believed in catastrophizing. "Medicine is iterative. You adjust based on what you learn." Roman looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "All right." Harlan left. Nora stayed to adjust the morning medication schedule and document the new protocol. And while she was writing, she said without looking up, "Something happened." Roman said nothing. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "I just want you to know I can see it, so you don't have to work as hard to cover it." He looked at her. She was still writing, focused on the page. "Why would that help?" he said. "Because covering things takes energy," she said. "And you're spending enough energy already." He was quiet for a moment. "There are things happening in my work that require attention. Okay? They may affect the household schedule. I'm flexible," she said. "They may also—" He stopped, started differently. "If anything changes abruptly, I want you to call Marcus first, not me. Marcus first immediately." She looked up then. Her eyes were direct and calm. "You're telling me there's a safety issue. I'm telling you to call Marcus first." She held his eyes for a long moment. "Okay," she said. And she went back to writing, and she didn't push it further. And Roman sat with the fact that the absence of panic in her response was simultaneously reassuring and troubling, because it meant she was already accounting for the possibility that this situation was dangerous and had made her peace with it and hadn't left. The dinner meeting at the Little Italy restaurant was Roman's first public appearance since March. He had not wanted to go. The operational briefing could have been handled at the estate, the way most briefings had been handled since January. But Gideon had suggested the venue, and 3 of the other lieutenants had agreed before Roman could redirect. And Roman had understood immediately that the suggestion had not been about convenience. It had been a test. Can he still show up? He showed up. The private dining room in the back of the restaurant on West Taylor Street seated 12, and there were 9 of them around the table. Roman at the head, Marcus 2 seats to his right, Gideon directly across, and the other 6 men arranged in the particular geometry of people who are watching 2 other people without appearing to watch them. Nora was not supposed to be there. She was there because Roman's blood pressure had spiked at the estate at 5 o'clock, hard enough that she'd come back after her afternoon break at Marcus's call, and by the time it stabilized it was 6:30, and Roman had told her to ride along because he needed the monitoring and didn't want to explain the situation to the restaurant staff. She sat at a small table near the door with a cup of coffee and her notebook, and made herself invisible in the particular way of someone who has learned that the most powerful position in a room is often the one that nobody is looking at. Roman could see her from the head of the table. The meeting went through freight logistics, 2 property acquisitions, and a labor dispute at one of the Calumet docks. Roman spoke twice, both times precisely, both times in the clipped, declarative tone that had always signaled to the men around him that the subject was settled. The room responded the way it always had, except for the fraction of a second when Gideon looked at Roman's wheelchair instead of Roman's face. He did it once. It was fast. Nobody else at the table would have caught it. Roman caught it. Then Gideon set his coffee cup down and said, "I want to raise something directly." The room's temperature dropped 2 degrees. "There are concerns," Gideon said carefully, "among some of the people we work with, about continuity, about capacity." He didn't look at the wheelchair again. He didn't have to. "I'm raising it here because I think it deserves to be raised honestly rather than in hallways." Nobody moved. Roman looked at Gideon across the table with the flat, patient attention of a man who has been expecting this and has had time to decide what to do with it when it arrived. Gideon continued. "The question being asked is whether the operation can sustain its current structure given the changes in leadership availability over the past 11 months. "Changes in leadership availability," Roman said. "I'm trying to be respectful." "I notice," Roman said. The silence stretched, and then Nora, from the table by the door, said, "Can I say something?" Every head in the room turned. She set her coffee down. She didn't stand up. She stayed seated, relaxed, elbows on the table, which was exactly the right physical posture for what she said next because it made the whole thing look effortless. "The man who survived a bomb that killed 2 people and left him in pieces, and who was running operations from a hospital bed within 10 days, She paused, looking at Gideon with the same directness she'd turned on Roman that first morning. His cognitive function is intact. His decision-making capacity is intact. His ability to analyze a situation and act on it accurately is intact. I know this because I assess it daily, professionally, and document it. She picked up her coffee again. The question of whether someone can lead isn't answered by whether they can stand up. It's answered by whether the decisions they make hold. If someone at this table has evidence that the decisions made in the last 11 months have been wrong, that's a legitimate conversation. If the concern is the wheelchair, she looked at Gideon, that's not a business concern. That's a preference. The room was absolutely still. Gideon's jaw moved slightly. Once. Roman looked at Nora for 1 second, then he looked at Gideon, and then he reached out and put his hand on Nora's shoulder. He did it deliberately, in front of everyone, with the full weight of what it communicated. Not ownership, not protection, but alignment. This person is beside me. The gesture moved through the room like a current, because every man at the table understood immediately what it meant, not about Nora, but about Roman, that whatever isolation the past 11 months had created, whatever distance the wheelchair and the private estate and the fired nurses had put between him and the people who worked for him, there was someone beside him now who hadn't been bought or coerced or assigned, and that was the most dangerous kind of person a man could have in his corner. Gideon saw it. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and dark. Gone before anyone else would have caught it. Roman caught it. "We're done with this subject," Roman said, and the meeting continued. The shooting happened 40 minutes later. They were on dessert, or most of the table was. Roman hadn't touched his, when the first window came in. Not from the street side. From the alley window on the north wall, which meant someone had positioned there in advance, which meant the restaurant had been under surveillance before they arrived, which meant this was not random and not opportunistic. The second shot took out the overhead light. The room dropped into chaos and shadow. Marcus had Roman out of the wheelchair and behind the overturned table in under 4 seconds. Marcus had drilled for exactly this in the years before the bombing, and he had re-drilled for the new physical parameters after January, with a focus that Roman had found At the time, excessive and now found entirely insufficient. Roman hit the floor hard. His left side flared white. He had a gun in his hand. He was always armed, always. This had not changed. And he was scanning the room from the floor, which was a different tactical angle than he was used to, and he was processing it as fast as he could, which was faster than most people in the room because most people in the room were panicking. Nora was not panicking. He could see her from the floor. She had gone flat behind her table at the first shot, which was the right instinct, and she had stayed low, and she was looking at him across the room with the same level attention she gave his blood pressure readings, like she was assessing the situation and determining what was required. What she determined was required was apparently to cross the room. She did it in a low sprint while the remaining gunfire was still coming, staying beneath the sight line of the windows, and she came down beside him behind the overturned table and pressed her fingers to his neck to check his pulse, which under the circumstances was a clinical instinct so pure that it almost made Roman laugh, except that he couldn't, because breathing was currently taking most of his attention. "Are you hit?" she said. "No." "You're pale." "I'm always pale." "You're paler than always." Her hand moved to his wrist, checking his pulse properly now. Her own breathing was controlled, not calm, controlled, which is different, which is harder. The shooting stopped. The room had about 8 seconds of silence. Then Marcus and 2 other men were moving toward the windows, and someone was calling for cars. And the particular managed chaos of a situation being brought back under control started filling the space. Nora stayed beside Roman. She didn't move to help anyone else. She stayed beside Roman with her hand on his wrist, tracking his pulse in the dark, and he was aware of her shoulder against his arm and the steadiness of her and the fact that she had crossed a room with bullets in it to do this, and he did not know what to do with that information. "I need to get up," he said. "In a minute." "Nora, your heart rate is 140, she said. "Give it 60 seconds. He gave it 60 seconds. Marcus came back. "3 shooters? They're gone. 2 of our guys are hit. DeLuca took one in the shoulder. He's conscious. Ferris has a graze on his forearm." "The restaurant?" "Staff are in the kitchen. They're okay." "Cars." "Outside. Ready." Roman put his hand on the edge of the overturned table and started to push himself up. Nora was already repositioning to help without being asked. Not hovering, just adjusting her body to where it needed to be so the movement worked. The way she'd learned in the past week how his weight distributed. He got up. He was back in the wheelchair in 30 seconds. His left side still had the white flare, but he could manage white flares now. He'd had months of practice. He looked at Nora. Her denim jacket had a thin cut along the left sleeve where something had passed close, glass or debris, not a bullet, or she wouldn't be standing, and there was a small bright bead of blood at the edge of it. "You're cut," he said. She looked at her arm. Superficial. She looked back at him, calculating. "We need to move." They moved. The safe house was 40 minutes north, in a neighborhood of quiet residential streets and large properties where nobody asked questions, and it smelled like dust and careful maintenance, a place that was kept ready without being lived in. Marcus had stocked it. There was medical equipment. There was food. There was a room for Roman with a bed at the right height and a bathroom with the right modifications. Nora stitched the cut on her arm herself, at the kitchen table, with supplies from the kit Marcus pointed her to, because Roman's shoulder needed her attention first. Roman had not mentioned the shoulder until they were inside. When he'd moved from the chair to the car, she'd seen him manage something in the transition, the specific controlled absence of expression that meant pain he was refusing to acknowledge, and she'd tracked it silently and waited. When they were inside, he said, "Left shoulder. Something hit me in the room." She helped him out of the jacket. There was a gash along the top of the shoulder. Debris, she thought, or the edge of the table when Marcus pulled him down, something that had opened the skin without being serious. She cleaned it. She applied pressure. She stitched it while Roman sat very still and looked at the wall, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the only sounds were the ordinary sounds of the house settling and traffic faint in the distance, and Nora doing the careful work of closing the wound. "Does it require a hospital?" he said. "No." "Good." "It's going to be sore for—" "Good," he said again, and the word closed that subject. She tied off the last stitch. She sat back and looked at the work, checking it. Then she looked at him. Your father, she said. What did he do? Roman looked at her. Why? Because you grew up learning something specific about how men are supposed to behave, and it's making this harder than it has to be, and I'm curious where it came from. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. He ran numbers, Roman said finally. Small operation, South Side. He was not successful. He paused. He believed that asking for help announced to everyone around you that you couldn't manage your situation, that it was the same as advertising weakness. And you believed him. I believed the results of not believing him. Roman looked at his hands. When I was 17, he asked someone for help, a favor, from another operator in the same territory. The man he asked used it as information. Within 8 months, my father's operation was gone. He looked up. He spent the rest of his life working for the man he'd asked. Nora was quiet for a moment. So you learned that needing someone gives them power over you. I learned it correctly, Roman said. It's accurate. It's accurate in some situations, she said. It's not a universal law. She started cleaning up the medical supplies. Surviving long enough to let someone help you might be the hardest thing a man like you can do. That's not weakness. That's a different kind of discipline. Roman looked at her for a moment. You're not afraid of this, he said. Not an accusation, an observation that had been building for a week. Of what? He gestured slightly. The safe house, the stitched shoulder, the evening they'd just had. I'm afraid of plenty of things, she said. I just don't let fear make the decisions. Roman looked at her for a long time. Something shifted in the room, quiet and irreversible, the way foundations shift in winter, not visible on the surface, not dramatic, but nothing will ever sit quite the same way above it. He said, Your brother's debt, to the dryer. The room went still. Nora set down the gauze she'd been folding. She turned and looked at him with a stillness that was not calm. It was the stillness of a person who has just had a floor open beneath them and is determining whether there is anything solid left to stand on. You knew, she said. Before you arrived the first morning, he said. Yes. She didn't say anything. The debt has been frozen, Roman said. No visits, no contact, no further accrual. I made the call 2 days ago. The silence stretched between them, taut and complicated. Why are you telling me now? She said. Roman held her eyes. Because you just stitched my shoulder in a safe house after a shooting, and you asked me about my father, and I am apparently no longer capable of maintaining the appropriate operational separation regarding the information I share with you. It was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in 11 months, possibly longer. Nora looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the gauze and finished folding it, and she said, Danny doesn't know any of this. No. I want it to stay that way. All right. And I want to know, she said, her voice flat and precise, if anything changes regarding him. You tell me directly. Yes, Roman said. She nodded once. She put the supplies away. They sat in the kitchen of the safe house while the night pressed against the windows. Two people who had each just handed the other something that couldn't be taken back, and neither of them spoke about it again that night, because some things, once said, don't need to be said again. They just need to be carried forward into whatever comes next. And what came next arrived at 3 a.m, when Marcus knocked on Roman's door and said, through the wood, in a voice stripped of everything except information, the security codes at the estate have been changed. Roman was awake. He had not slept. Changed by whom? He said. That's the problem, Marcus said. It wasn't any of us. Roman opened the door. Marcus was standing in the hallway of the safe house with his phone in his hand and the look on his face that Roman had only seen twice before in 14 years. Once, when a shipment had been seized at Calumet with 2 of their people inside it, and once when Marcus's brother had called with the kind of news that doesn't improve with repetition. It was the look of a man who has already processed the information and is now waiting for someone with more authority to tell him what to do with it. Walk me through it, Roman said. Marcus came in. He pulled up the security app on his phone and turned the screen so Roman could see the estate's panel. The grid of access points, cameras, motion sensors, all of it. The master override code, which only 3 people in the world possessed, had been cycled at 2:47 in the morning. The new code had locked out all existing credentials. Every door in the estate was currently operating under an access protocol that Roman could not enter. Who are the 3? Nora said from the doorway of her room. She was still dressed. She hadn't slept either, apparently. Me, Roman said. Marcus. And the system administrator who set it up originally, a man named Voss who works out of a security firm in Schaumburg. Voss, Marcus said. I've been calling him for 20 minutes. No answer. Roman looked at the phone screen. He was doing the math, not out loud, just behind his eyes, the way he'd always processed information, quietly, rapidly, without announcing the intermediate steps. If Voss had been compromised or bought or simply threatened, someone had had his contact information and his professional leverage. That information lived in one place within Roman's organization, the operational security file that Gideon Crowell maintained as part of his administrative portfolio. Gideon had the file. Gideon had always had the file. Roman handed the phone back to Marcus. Get me Voss's home address. I have it. I can have 2 men there in 40 minutes. Send them. Tell them to knock, not break in, and to call me the moment he opens the door. Roman turned the wheelchair toward the window. The sky outside was the particular dark of 3 in the morning, the kind of dark that has weight to it, that presses down. And I want eyes on the estate. External eyes. Nobody who's been through the front gate in the last 6 months. I have a contact at a private firm, ex-CPD. Use them. Marcus left. Nora came into the room and sat in the chair near the window without being invited, which Roman had noticed was a habit of hers. She installed herself in rooms the way furniture installs itself, without ceremony, without asking permission, as though the space simply made more sense with her in it. Gideon, she said. Roman looked at her. You've been building a file on him, she said. The encrypted one. I've seen you close it when I come in. He was quiet for a moment. You're observant. Occupational requirement. She folded her hands in her lap. How long? Seriously, since the bombing. He turned the chair slightly, facing the window. Before that, there were questions, things that didn't add up completely. I told myself they were the kind of questions that come with running a complex operation, that not everything resolves cleanly. But after January I had time, Roman said. A great deal of time. Sitting still in a rehabilitation facility with nothing to do but think. He paused. I thought. Nora was quiet. The bomb was built around my schedule, Roman said. My exact schedule, the parking spot, the time, the approach route. That information existed in exactly 4 places. My own head, Marcus's operational notes, the Marquette Street office manager, who has been with me 18 years and whose family I have been funding since his daughter's illness, and Gideon's logistics calendar, which tracked my movements for security coordination. He turned to look at her. I eliminated 3 of those. I've been trying to eliminate the 4th without proof I could use. And now someone's changed your security codes. Now someone has changed my security codes, Roman said, which requires access to a file that Gideon maintains. Yes. Nora looked at her hands, then at him. What do you need? I need, Roman said carefully, to get back into my own house without announcing that I'm coming, and I need the USB drive that's in the bottom drawer of my desk, in a false back behind the hanging files. What's on it? 11 months of documentation, transaction records, call logs, movement patterns. Everything I've been able to compile quietly without tipping him that I was looking. He held her eyes. It's the only copy. I was waiting until I had enough to present to the other lieutenants in a way that couldn't be dismissed. If Gideon gets into that desk before I do, he'll know what you have, she said. He'll know what I have, and he'll know how close I am. Roman's jaw tightened, and then the calculus changes entirely. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the residential street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. I know a way in, Nora said. Roman looked at her. The service entrance on the north side, she said. The lock on it is mechanical, no electronic component. It's on a separate system. I noticed it the 3rd day because it's the entrance the pharmacy delivery uses, and the code is a 4-digit push button, not a keypad. She paused. I know the code because I watched the delivery man enter it twice, and I have a good memory for numbers. Roman studied her. You noticed that in your first week. I notice exits, she said simply. Habit. He looked at her for another moment. Why do you have a habit of noticing exits? She met his eyes. Because I grew up in a house where you sometimes needed one. She said it flatly, without invitation for follow-up, the same way he'd said things flatly in the past week when he didn't want the thing examined further. He recognized the register and respected it. "All right," he said. "Talk me through it." They went back to the estate at 5 in the morning when the dark was still solid and the neighborhood was as quiet as it ever got. Marcus drove. Roman was in the back, Nora beside him, and two of Marcus's men followed in a separate car 2 blocks behind. The estate looked the same from the outside. The iron gates, the long drive, the lights on the exterior that ran on a separate generator circuit and wouldn't have been affected by the security override. It looked like a house that was simply sleeping. Marcus drove past it without slowing and parked on the service road that ran behind the north wall, where the delivery entrance was. He killed the headlights 100 yards out. "I go first," Marcus said. "No," Roman said. "Roman, if someone is inside and they see you first, it escalates. If Nora goes to the service entrance, she's a nurse arriving early. It reads differently." He looked at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "Give her 2 minutes. If she's not at the interior north door in 2 minutes, then you go." Marcus's expression said everything about what he thought of this plan. His mouth said nothing, which meant he'd already accepted it. Nora got out of the car. Roman watched her cross the service road and disappear into the shadow at the base of the north wall. He watched the space where she'd been for 1 second, just one, before he made himself look away. He counted internally. At 40 seconds, Marcus's hand went to the door handle. Roman said, "Wait." At 1 minute 50, his phone vibrated. A text from Nora's number. "In, North Corridor. Clear so far." Marcus exhaled. "Go," Roman said. "All of you. Nora stays with me." Oops. She had propped the interior north door with the rubber wedge from her medical bag, something she'd apparently pocketed before they left the safe house, which meant she'd thought about this in advance, which was the kind of operational thinking that Roman associated with people who'd spent time in situations where thinking ahead was the difference between options and none. He got through the door in the wheelchair. The north corridor was dark, the tile floor giving the wheels a soft, almost inaudible roll. Marcus and his 2 men spread out ahead, moving through the house in the systematic way Marcus moved through everything, methodical, no wasted motion, covering angles before proceeding. Roman and Nora moved toward the study. The study door was closed, which it was always closed. This meant nothing. Roman turned the handle. Inside, the room looked untouched. He went to the desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, reached into the hanging files, pressed the back panel. The false back released with a soft click, hinged at the bottom, and he reached in and closed his hand around the USB drive. It was there. He held it for a moment. 11 months of documentation in an object the size of a thumb. Everything he'd built quietly, without anyone knowing he was building it, in the hours between his sessions with the rehabilitation therapist, and his medication schedules, and the long nights when the pain wouldn't let him sleep, and he had nothing to do but think and document and wait. He put it in his breast pocket. He was about to close the drawer when he saw the envelope. It was at the back of the drawer, partially beneath the hanging files, a white business envelope with nothing written on the outside. He picked it up. It was light. 1 sheet of paper inside, maybe 2. He looked at it for a moment. It had not been there the last time he'd been in this drawer, which had been 11 days ago. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph was of Nora. It had been taken from a distance, street photography, candid. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was coming out of a building in Logan Square, the friend's apartment where she'd been living before taking the position at the estate. She was carrying groceries. The timestamp printed in the corner was from 3 weeks ago, 5 days after she'd started working for Roman. The note, in handwriting Roman recognized as Gideon's without needing confirmation, said, "You're not protecting her. You're exposing her. Stop now, or this gets complicated." Roman sat very still. He read the note twice. Then he put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in his breast pocket, beside the USB drive, and he closed the drawer, and he sat in the quiet of his study for exactly 10 seconds doing absolutely nothing, which was the amount of time he allowed himself to react before he had to start deciding. Nora was standing near the window. She had seen him find the envelope. She had not asked. "We need to leave," he said. "What was in it?" "A photograph." He turned the wheelchair toward the door. "Of you." She went very still. The particular stillness that isn't fear but the thing that comes just before fear, the cognitive moment where a person computes the implications of what they've just heard and arrives at an answer they don't want. He's been watching me, she said, since your first week. Roman moved to the door, which means he identified you as significant before I gave him any reason to. How? Because he was already watching me carefully enough to notice the personnel change. Roman stopped at the door. And because whoever told him about the security code override also had access to the household roster. Nora looked at him. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was managing something internally. The jaw steady, the eyes tracking, the expression level in a way that cost something to maintain. There's someone else, she said, inside the estate. Someone besides Gideon. Roman said, yes. He had suspected it for 6 days. He had not said it out loud until now, because saying it out loud meant committing to the implication, which was that the betrayal went deeper than one lieutenant with patience and ambition, that it extended into the household itself, into the space that was supposed to be the one controlled environment in his life. He said it now because Nora needed to know, and because he had apparently stopped being able to maintain operational separation regarding the information he shared with her, and because the envelope in his pocket changed everything about what happened next. Marcus found the traitor at 6:15 in the morning. It was one of the estate's security staff, a man named Pollard, who had been with the operation for 3 years, who had been hired through a staffing company that Gideon had recommended, which in retrospect was the tell that had been in plain sight the entire time. Pollard had been the one on overnight when the security codes were cycled. He had Voss's personal number in his call log. He had made contact with Voss directly at 2 in the morning, and what he had said to Voss, what threats or payments had moved the system administrator to cooperate, Marcus didn't know yet. Pollard was currently in the estate's equipment room with 2 of Marcus's men, which was a situation that would resolve itself into information given enough time and the right kind of pressure. Marcus reported all of this to Roman in the kitchen of the estate, standing at the counter with his phone and the flat voice of someone delivering a briefing because the briefing is all he can control right now. Roman listened. He was drinking coffee. Nora had made it, the first domestic act she'd performed in the estate, and it was strong enough to strip paint, which Roman appreciated. He drank it and listened to Marcus and said nothing until Marcus was finished. Pollard knew about the safe house, Roman said. It was not a question. Marcus's face moved slightly. That's what I'm concerned about, yes. Which means Gideon knows we're back in the estate. If Pollard had contact with him after we arrived, yes. Roman set the coffee down. He looked at the kitchen table, at the grain of it, at a specific knot in the wood that gave him something to focus on while he worked through what the situation actually was. Gideon had tried to take out the organization's leadership at the restaurant. The attempt had failed. He had then moved to lock Roman out of his own estate, which had also failed, barely, and only because Nora had a good memory for numbers and a habit of noticing exits. He had placed a photograph in Roman's desk as a warning or a threat, which told Roman that Gideon still believed Roman might back down, might retreat, might choose self-preservation over confrontation. 11 years of knowing Roman Vaylor, and Gideon had still managed to mistake him for someone who backs down. How many people does he have direct access to inside the organization? Roman said. Marcus thought. Eastern Freight. Those are his directly. Maybe 30 people across 3 operations. Of the lieutenants at the table last night, I'd put Ferraro and possibly Kane in his sphere. Not definitely. Ferraro, definitely. Kane, I don't know. He's transactional. He'll go where the outcome looks certain. So if the outcome looks certain on my side, Kane folds back, Marcus said. Probably. Roman picked up the coffee again. The kitchen was quiet, early morning light coming through the window over the sink, the house settling around them, the particular domestic peace of a large property in the hour before it fully wakes. It was the kind of quiet that preceded things, and Roman had been in this business long enough to know that you didn't squander quiet, you used it to think. I need to send Nora somewhere, he said. Marcus didn't say anything. She can't be here when this moves, Roman said. I need her away from the estate, somewhere Gideon's people don't have a line to, until this is resolved. From the doorway of the kitchen, Nora said, No. Both men turned. She was leaning against the doorframe with her coffee, which she had apparently been drinking in the corridor while listening to the entirety of the conversation, because whatever Roman had thought about Nora Bellamy in the past 9 days, naive was not one of the words he'd have used, and silent doorway monitoring was apparently a skill set she'd developed without advertising it. Nora, he started. I heard what you said, she said. The answer is no. If you tell me this is not a negotiation, she said, I'm going to pour this coffee down the sink and walk out the front door, which will create exactly the uncontrolled situation you're trying to avoid. She looked at him steadily. I'm not cargo. You don't move me around for operational convenience. Roman looked at her. Marcus looked at the window. He has a photograph of you, Roman said. I know. He will use you. I know that too. She pushed off the doorframe and came into the kitchen fully. But removing me doesn't remove the leverage. It just removes me from the situation where I can see what's happening, which is worse for both of us. She was right. Roman knew she was right before she finished the sentence, which was the most frustrating kind of right. The kind that arrives fully formed, without gaps you can argue into. If you stay, he said, you do what Marcus says when Marcus says it, without discussion. She looked at Marcus, then back at Roman. Within reason. Without discussion, Roman said again. She was quiet for a moment, then, okay. Marcus exhaled very quietly. Bob. Voss called at 7:43. He was alive and uninjured, which was the first good news of the morning. He had cooperated with Pollard under a specific kind of pressure, not physical threat to himself, but a credible threat to his daughter, whose name and college address and morning class schedule Pollard had recited to him at 2 a.m. with the flatness of someone reading from a document. Voss had been given the new override code by Pollard and instructed to implement it remotely. He had done so. He was now, he said, willing to reverse the change and restore the original credentials. He was also crying, which Roman had not expected and did not know how to accommodate. Nora took the phone. She talked to Voss for 4 minutes in a voice Roman hadn't heard her use before. Quieter than her clinical voice, less flat, with a patience in it that seemed bottomless. She told him his daughter was not in danger. She told him that the person who made the threat would not be in a position to follow through on it. She told him to implement the reversal and then to take his daughter somewhere outside the city for the next 72 hours, expenses covered. Marcus would make the arrangement. She got the confirmation that the codes were restored and handed the phone back to Roman. Roman looked at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. He called Marcus. Codes are restored. I want Voss and his daughter relocated for 72 hours, clean, nothing that connects back to the estate. Done, Marcus said. Roman put the phone down. He sat in the kitchen with the morning light moving across the table, and he thought about what Gideon had and hadn't done. The restaurant shooting. 3 shooters, all gone, no casualties on Roman's side except minor injuries. The security override, reversed. The photograph. A warning that had failed to warn. 3 moves, and none of them had landed, which meant Gideon was going to escalate. The question was how fast and from which direction. The answer came at 8:51 in the morning. Marcus's radio, the encrypted one, the frequency only used for estate security, crackled, and then a voice that was not any of Marcus's men said, "Tell Roman to check the East Gate camera." Roman and Marcus looked at each other. Marcus pulled up the camera feed. At the east gate of the estate, standing on the public sidewalk beyond the iron bars, was Gideon Crowell. He was alone. He was dressed the way he always dressed, good wool, conservative cut, nothing that attracted attention. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking directly into the camera with the expression of a man who has decided that the time for indirection is finished. Beside him, standing slightly behind his right shoulder, was Nora Bellamy. Nora was across the room. She hadn't seen the screen yet. Roman looked at the image for 2 seconds. He processed it completely. The positioning, the body language, the fact that Danny was standing and appeared uninjured, which meant this was display rather than damage, a demonstration of capability rather than an act of violence. Gideon was showing the card, not playing it. Not yet. Roman said quietly, "Marcus, Nora doesn't see this feed." Marcus moved to block the screen without making it obvious. But Nora had already turned at the change in the room's atmosphere, at the specific quality of silence that descends when 2 people are managing information in the presence of a third. And she had crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and was looking at the screen before Marcus completed the motion. She looked at it for a long moment. The East Gate. Gideon standing like a man who has just put all his chips on the table and is waiting for the response. "How long has he had him?" she said. Her voice was completely flat. Flat the way a road is flat just before it drops off at a cliff edge. I don't know, Roman said. How long has he known about Danny? Roman was silent. She turned and looked at him. You told me the debt was frozen. You told me there'd be no contact. I froze it from my side, Roman said. Gideon has his own access to the Dryer's accounts. You knew that. I knew that, Roman said. The truth of it sat in the room without apology because it didn't have one to offer. Roman had frozen what he could freeze. He had not controlled what Gideon could reach independently. He had known the gap existed. He had told himself it was manageable. Nora looked at him for a long time. He held it, didn't deflect, didn't explain further, just held it, because she was entitled to look at him that way, and he was not going to reduce it by adding words to it. Then she turned back to the screen. Open the gate, she said. Absolutely not, Marcus said. He's standing on a public sidewalk with my brother, she said. He's not going to do anything to Danny out there. He wants Roman to let him in, which means he wants a conversation, which means he believes he still has something to negotiate with. She turned to Roman. Let him in. One man, no weapons. Front courtyard. Marcus's people visible. She paused. He thinks you're weakened and isolated. Show him what isolated actually looks like. Roman looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus's expression said that this was, on the available evidence, an insane plan. Roman said, Open the gate. Gideon walked through the front courtyard with Danny beside him, and he had the steady walk of a man who has played out this scenario in his head enough times that the reality of it no longer surprises him. He was the kind of dangerous that only comes from patience. Not heat, not rage, but the cold accumulated pressure of years of waiting for exactly the right moment. Marcus had 4 people visible in the courtyard, and Roman knew there were 3 more that weren't. Roman was at the top of the entrance steps, which meant he was above Gideon in the physical space, which was deliberate. The slope of the approach put the wheelchair at eye level with a standing man at the base of the steps. And Roman had positioned himself there specifically because he understood that optics were a form of argument. Gideon stopped at the base of the steps. He looked at Roman, then he looked, briefly, at Nora, who was standing 2 feet to Roman's left. I didn't expect her to still be here, Gideon said. She surprises people, Roman said. Gideon looked at Danny. Danny was 22 years younger than anyone else in this courtyard and had the look of a man who had been awake for a very long time and was operating on a combination of fear and the specific stubborn composure of someone who has decided not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him break. Nora was looking at her brother. Roman could see her in his peripheral vision, the way her hands were at her sides, very still, and the way she was holding the stillness like something that would cost her if she released it. We can do this quickly, Gideon said. You give me the USB drive and I walk away. The Bellamy situation resolves. You keep the estate, you keep the legitimate operations, you transition out of the rest over 12 months with my cooperation. He paused. You retire, Roman, with everything you've built, on your terms. The courtyard was absolutely quiet. Roman looked at Gideon. He looked at him with the patient, flat attention that he'd been looking at people with for 30 years. The look that was not anger and not fear and not dismissal, but simply the undivided processing of a man who is deciding what is true. You built the bomb, Roman said. Gideon didn't flinch. I made a business decision. You built the bomb, and you've spent 11 months managing my isolation, and you arranged the shooting at Little Italy, and you compromised my security codes, and now you're standing in my courtyard with a civilian who has nothing to do with any of this. Roman paused. And you think I'm going to give you a drive and retire? I think, Gideon said carefully, that you've spent 11 months in a wheelchair learning how much you've lost. And I think that a man in your position, with your intelligence, knows when the math doesn't work in his favor. Roman was quiet for a moment. Show him, Roman said to Marcus. Marcus stepped forward and handed Gideon a tablet. On the screen was a document, a summary, 2 pages, of the contents of the USB drive, transaction records, call logs. 3 witnesses whose names appeared in the logs and whose statements Marcus had been quietly collecting for 6 weeks. The complete architecture of what Gideon had built and Roman had documented. That's a summary, Roman said. The full file went to 3 separate locations this morning, before you arrived. If anything happens to anyone in this courtyard, those files go to people who will use them. He held Gideon's eyes. So the math you think doesn't work in my favor. I'd look at it again. Gideon looked at the tablet. He looked at it for a long time. Something moved through his face. Not fear exactly, but the specific expression of a man recalculating under time pressure, finding the numbers don't add up the way he'd constructed them, looking for the variable he missed. He looked up. And in the half second before he controlled his expression, Roman saw it. The thing that had been behind 11 years of flawless performance. The thing that had been underneath the patience and the calculation and the careful waiting. It was not ambition. It was hatred. Personal, specific, and old. Roman filed it away, turned it over once, and understood something he hadn't understood before. That this had never been purely about the organization or the power or the position. This had been about Roman specifically, about something Roman had done or not done or represented in 11 years of proximity that Gideon had never once named out loud. He didn't have time to pursue it because Gideon looked at Nora Bellamy and then looked at Nora, and the calculation in his eyes shifted to something that was no longer about the USB drive or the documentation or the retirement offer, and Roman understood in the same instant that Nora understood it, and the courtyard changed entirely in the space of 1 second from a negotiation into something else. Gideon said, "Then we have a problem," and his hand came out of his pocket, and what came next happened very fast, and the morning light did nothing to soften any of it. Gideon's hand came out of his pocket with a phone, not a weapon. That was the first thing Roman registered, the shape of it, rectangular, the wrong geometry for a gun, and the cortisol spike that had flooded his system in the half second of anticipation. Didn't recede, it just redirected, because a phone in Gideon's hand at this moment was not a de-escalation. It was a detonator of a different kind. Gideon turned the screen outward. On it was a live video feed, a room Roman recognized, the Eastern Freight Warehouse at Calumet, the one that ran the legitimate operations alongside the consolidated accounts. There were 6 men visible in the feed, seated along the far wall with their hands visible, and behind them stood 4 men Roman didn't recognize, which meant they were Gideon's people imported from outside the organization, people with no prior loyalty to the structure Roman had built, people who answered to one name only. 18 people total in that building right now, Gideon said. 6 are mine, 12 are yours. The 6 of mine have instructions that will execute automatically if I don't send a specific code in the next 40 minutes. He looked at Roman with the flat patience of a man who has been planning this particular morning for a very long time. I'm not negotiating the drive anymore. I'm telling you what happens next. The courtyard was frozen. Marcus had gone very still in the particular way of a man whose training is fighting with his instinct and training is winning, barely. Roman looked at the phone screen. He counted the visible faces. He assessed the room's geometry from memory, the warehouse layout, the exits, the structural columns, the loading dock that opened to the eastern approach. He did this in approximately 4 seconds, automatically, the same way he'd always processed physical space as tactical information. What are your instructions? Roman said. That depends on you, Gideon said. That's not an answer. Gideon looked at him. The drive. The passcode to the encrypted backup you sent out this morning. Because I know you sent it out, Roman. I know how you think, and I know you wouldn't walk into this without a secondary. And you walk away from the freight operation entirely. Sign the transfer documents that my attorney has prepared. He paused. You keep the legitimate businesses, the logistics companies, the North Shore properties. You keep the life. His eyes moved to Nora. You keep whatever this is. In the silence that followed, Nora Bellamy shifted his weight, and Gideon put a hand on his shoulder. Not hard, not violent, just present, just there. In the particular way that communicates I own the proximity to this person right now, and we both know it. Nora's hands, at her sides, curled once and then opened flat again. Roman watched her do it. He looked back at Gideon. You have 40 minutes on that clock. 39 now. Then let's use them efficiently. Roman turned the wheelchair. Come inside. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a word. Marcus, Roman said without turning. He comes in. His 2 men at the gate stay outside. Danny stays in the courtyard with you. He glanced back, catching Nora's eyes. Nora. She understood. She moved to stand near Danny, close enough to be present, far enough not to be restrained. Danny looked at her with the expression of a younger sibling who has spent his whole life creating situations that his older sister has to survive. Ashamed and relieved in equal measure, the specific combination that only family can produce. She didn't say anything to him, she just stood there, and the standing there said enough. Inside the study, Roman went behind his desk. Gideon sat across from it, the way he always had, the leather portfolio absent this time, the phone face up on the desk between them, with the warehouse feed still running and the timer someone had set in the corner of the screen counting down in red. 37 minutes. Roman looked at the screen. He looked at his 12 people along the wall of that warehouse. He recognized 3 of them by name without trying. Loretta, from the accounts office, who had worked for him for 9 years and had 3 kids in school in Bridgeport. Torres from the dock management team, who had come to Roman at 24 with a juvie record and nothing else, and who Roman had built from the ground up. An older man named Price, who handled the customs coordination and who had a wife receiving cancer treatment at Northwestern that Roman's insurance coverage was currently paying for. He looked at the timer. 36. "You've been planning this since before the bomb," Roman said. Gideon said nothing. "Not since I was in the wheelchair," Roman said. "Before. You planned the bomb, and you planned what came after it simultaneously." He kept his voice level, analytical, the way he discussed financial discrepancies. Not because he felt level, but because level was the tool the situation required. The shooting at the restaurant was supposed to finish what the bomb didn't. "The restaurant was a contingency," Gideon said. "For what?" "For you recovering faster than projected." Something shifted in Gideon's expression, not quite pride, but the cousin of it. The satisfaction of someone who has executed something complex and wants that recognized even in failure. "You weren't supposed to be functional at this level by November." The rehabilitation timeline suggested. "You read my medical file," Roman said. "I read everything in your operation. That was my job." "My medical file is not part of my operation." "Everything in your life is part of your operation," Gideon said. And the way he said it wasn't aggression, it was correction, like Roman had made a factual error. "You built it that way. You made sure of it. Everything connected, everything cross-referenced, everything monitored. You wanted a machine that ran without gaps." He looked at Roman steadily. "The gap you missed was me." 34 minutes. Roman put both hands flat on the desk. He looked at his hands for a moment, the right one steady, the left one with the faint tremor that the new medication schedule had been slowly reducing over the past 4 days. He looked at the tremor, and he thought about what Harlan Fitch had said about iterative adjustment, about learning from what you observe and changing based on it, about how that was not failure, but process. "Why?" Roman said. Gideon looked at him. "Not operationally," Roman said. "I understand the operational logic. You saw a structure you thought you could take. That's comprehensible." He held Gideon's eyes. "I want to know the other reason. The one that's been running underneath the operational logic for 11 years. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus Reyes," he said finally. Roman went still. Marcus Reyes was not Marcus, his head of security. Marcus Reyes had been a man who worked for Roman's operation 12 years ago, on the Western Freight Corridor, a man who had skimmed from the accounts for 14 months before Roman discovered it, and whom Roman had handled the way Roman handled that category of problem in those years. Decisively, permanently, and without appeal. "He was your brother," Roman said. It was not a question. He was retrieving the information as he said it, turning it over, fitting it against 11 years of data, and finding the place where it clicked into position like a key he'd had all along and never tried. "Half-brother," Gideon said. "Different mothers. I didn't know him well." He paused. "That's not the point. Then what is the point?" "The point," Gideon said, with a patience that had gone cold and hard over a decade of maintenance, "is that you made a decision about a man's life, and you didn't hesitate for 1 second. And then you went back to your desk, and you balanced your books, and you didn't think about it again." He looked at Roman with the specific fury of someone who has been precise about their anger for a very long time. "I thought about it every day for 11 years. I waited until I understood your operation better than you did. And then I made a decision about your life." He glanced at the wheelchair. "I didn't hesitate either." The room was completely still. Roman looked at him. He looked at the hatred he'd seen in the courtyard, which now had a name and a shape and a 12-year architecture. And he understood that he was not looking at a man who would accept documents or passcodes or negotiated exits, because this had never been about the organization. This had always been about this room, this desk, these two men. 31 minutes. Roman pressed the intercom on his desk. "Marcus," he said. Static. Then, "Here. I need the Calumet response now. Full team, east approach, you have the layout." Gideon reached across the desk toward the phone with the warehouse feed. Fast. Roman was faster. His left hand came down on Gideon's wrist before the reach completed, the grip hard and precise, his left arm bearing the weight while his right hand pulled the phone off the desk and dropped it into his lap. Gideon tried to stand. Roman held the wrist. His left shoulder fired white pain from the stitched gash, the same shoulder Nora had closed carefully in the safe house kitchen at 4 in the morning, and he held the grip through the white and kept Gideon's wrist locked to the desk surface. "Sit down," Roman said. Gideon was standing, half risen, his free hand reaching inside his jacket. The study door opened. Nora came in first, which was wrong, which meant something had happened in the courtyard, and behind her came one of Gideon's men from the gate with his hand at her back. And behind him came Danny with his jaw set and his eyes doing the specific frightened calculation of a man trying to figure out whether to act or stay still and getting it wrong in both directions simultaneously. Roman released Gideon's wrist. Gideon straightened his jacket. "They were supposed to stay outside," Roman said, looking at the man behind Nora. "Change of plan," Gideon said. He sat back down, smoothed his sleeve over the wrist Roman had gripped. "Your team at Calumet needs 45 minutes minimum to mobilize and execute. We both know that." He looked at the timer on the phone in Roman's lap. "You have 29. The room had become a different room. 4 people now instead of 2, and the geometry of it had shifted. Nora between the door and the desk, Danny beside her, Gideon's man with the specific stance of someone who has been told to hold a position and is holding it, and Roman behind the desk in the wheelchair, with 11 months of accumulated damage in his left side, and a phone with a countdown in his lap, and Gideon across from him with 12 years of patient hatred and the operational control of a warehouse full of Roman's people. Roman looked at Nora. She looked back at him. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was assessing, tracking, processing, filing. She was not looking at Gideon's man directly. She was looking at Roman, but she was aware of the man's position the way she was always aware of exits and the way things were positioned in a room. Her left hand, hanging at her side, was 2 inches from her medical bag. Roman had not noticed until this moment that she'd brought it inside. He looked at her eyes, and she looked at his, and something moved between them that wasn't words. The particular communication of 2 people who have spent 9 days in close proximity to each other's fear and steadiness, and have, without planning it, learned to read each other in the space below language. Roman looked at Gideon. 29 minutes isn't enough, he said. You're right about that. Gideon watched him. But here's what you've miscalculated, Roman said. You've been watching me for 11 years. You understand how I run an organization. You understand how I process information and how I make decisions and how I respond to operational pressure. He set the phone on the desk, face up, timer visible. What you don't understand, he paused, is her. Gideon frowned, started to. Nora swung the medical bag. She'd pulled it up from the floor in one motion, by the strap, and she caught Gideon's man across the side of the face with the full weight of it, which was substantial because Nora Bellamy was a working nurse who carried a full emergency kit including a blood pressure cuff, 2 liters of IV saline solution in sealed bags, a pulse oximeter, a medication case, and various hard-cased instruments, which put the bag's weight at approximately 11 pounds. And the man went sideways and hard into the door frame, and his hand came away from Nora's back completely. Danny moved. Not well, not trained, but fast, and with the specific commitment of someone who has finally identified what the right action is and is furious. It took so long to arrive. He grabbed the man's jacket as he hit the doorframe and pulled him further off balance, and the 2 of them went into the wall together, struggling. Gideon was on his feet. Roman drove the wheelchair straight into him. The chair was reinforced. Marcus had specified the frame when Roman came home from rehabilitation, arguing for the heavy-duty base over Roman's objections. And Roman had capitulated because he was tired and Marcus was persistent. And in this moment, the additional 40 pounds of steel and motor housing hit Gideon at hip level and knocked him backward over his own chair and onto the floor. Roman was down from the chair in the same motion, not gracefully, not without pain, but fast, dropping his weight to the floor on his right side and using the desk edge to control the descent. Because he had spent 11 months relearning what his body could and couldn't do, and floor combat was something he'd worked out in the private hours when nobody was watching, when the rage of what had been taken from him needed somewhere to go besides the walls of the rehabilitation room. Gideon hit the floor and tried to get up. Roman was already on him. He got his right arm across Gideon's throat from behind. Not a choke, a control, the position that holds a person without ending them, the position that says you are done moving now. And his left arm shook with the effort, and the shoulder screamed, and he held it anyway, held it through the shaking and the white and the specific grinding sensation of stitches pulling at the edges of the wound. And Gideon struggled, strong, stronger than Roman had expected for a man his age, and Roman tightened the arm. "Stop," Roman said. His voice was close to Gideon's ear, and it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Stop moving." Gideon stopped. His chest was heaving. Roman's was too. The floor was cold under Roman's knee, the one knee, the right leg, the one that had survived January intact, and the left side of him where the prosthetic met the socket was a continuous specific agony that he was managing by not thinking about it, the way you manage certain things by deciding they don't get to exist right now. Across the room, Danny had the man from the door pinned against the wall with both arms, which was not a sustainable position because Danny was smaller and less trained. But Marcus came through the study door at a hard run and took it from there. And then there were two more of Marcus's men in the room, and the situation resolved itself into controlled in approximately 8 seconds. The room went still. Roman stayed on the floor with his arm across Gideon's throat and the phone with the warehouse countdown somewhere above them on the desk, and his left shoulder bleeding again through the stitches. He could feel it, the warmth spreading against the shirt, and Gideon not moving beneath him. "The code," Roman said. Gideon said nothing. "Gideon." Roman's voice was very quiet and very even and very close. "In 26 minutes, a team of people who've worked for me for years are going to be hurt because of instructions you put in place. I need the code to cancel those instructions. Give me the code." Silence. "I know why you did this," Roman said. "I understand the reason. I'm not asking you to give me something without giving you something in return." He paused. "Give me the code, and the evidence I have, the documentation on the USB drive, stays internal. You face this organization, not a federal case, not a public record." Another pause. "Marcus Reyes gets a clean account in this company's books. Whatever I owe for what I did, I acknowledge the debt, internally, to you." He let that sit. "That's what I can give you." The room was silent. Gideon's breathing was ragged. His chest moved under Roman's arm in uneven intervals. Then he said a string of numbers. 12 digits, no pattern. Roman could identify. Recited from memory with the flat precision of a man who has had them memorized for a while. Roman looked up at Marcus. Marcus had his phone out and was calling before the last digit landed. 22 seconds later, Marcus said, "Code accepted. They're standing down." Roman released the arm. He stayed on the floor for a moment. Just a moment. His left shoulder was bleeding steadily now, and his right leg had a shake in it from the sustained effort, and the cold of the floor was working its way through the fabric of his pants, and he was breathing hard, which he was trying not to let be visible, which was probably not working. Nora was beside him. She hadn't asked. She'd crossed the room and she was down on the floor next to him with her hand at his shoulder, already assessing the wound through the fabric, her fingers finding the edges of it. "The stitches pulled," she said. "I know. 3 of them, maybe 4. I know." She looked at him, directly, close, the way she always looked at him when she needed an honest answer. "Can you get up?" "Yes," he said. He didn't know if it was true yet. He said it anyway, because the alternative was not something he was prepared to say on the floor of his own study in front of Marcus and his men and Gideon Crowell. She put her hand under his right arm, not hovering, not lifting, just present, a point of contact that he could choose to use or not use. He used it. He got his right leg under him, leveraged from the desk edge with his right arm, and came up from the floor in one sustained effort that cost him considerably and produced a result that was almost dignified. He got back into the wheelchair. He sat for a moment. Just sat, letting his breathing normalize, letting the white in his shoulder settle to a manageable throb. Marcus's men had Gideon on his feet and zip-tied, an improvised solution that was not elegant but was sufficient. Danny was standing against the wall looking at his sister with the expression of a man who has just watched someone he thought he knew turn out to be someone he didn't know at all. Not smaller, not larger, just completely different from the person he'd constructed. Roman looked at Gideon. Gideon was looking back at him. The calculation was gone from his face. What was left underneath it was not what Roman had expected. Not defeat, not fury. It was something closer to exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of a person who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down, regardless of the circumstances of the setting. "Marcus Reyes," Roman said. Gideon looked at him. "I remember him," Roman said. It was the closest thing to acknowledgement he was capable of in this moment, and he knew it wasn't enough, and he said it anyway because it was what he had. Gideon said nothing. Marcus led him out. The study went quiet. Danny was still against the wall. Nora was at the desk, opening her medical bag, extracting what she needed to address the shoulder. The phone with the warehouse feed lay on the desk, the timer at 0, the feed showing 12 people who were standing up and moving and alive. Roman watched the feed for a moment. Then he looked at his hands. The left one had the tremor, more pronounced now from the exertion, the sustained grip of the past 20 minutes showing in the unsteady movement of his fingers against the armrest of the chair. "Come here," Nora said from beside the desk. She had gauze and tape and antiseptic ready, and she was waiting with the particular patience of someone who has decided that the clinical work is the thing she can control and is therefore focusing on it completely. He moved the chair toward her. She helped him out of the jacket. She cut the shirt away from the shoulder without asking, because the wound needed access and the shirt was already ruined, and she was not a person who wasted time on formalities when there was actual work to be done. She looked at the shoulder, assessed it, pressed a gauze pad firmly against the bleeding, and held it. "Hold this," she said, and guided his hand to the gauze. He held it. She opened the antiseptic. "It needs to be restitched." "Here." "Here," she agreed. "I have what I need." She glanced up at him. "This is going to hurt more than the first time because the tissue is already compromised." "I know. I'm telling you so you can prepare." "I know," he said again, and he looked at the warehouse feed on the phone while she worked, at the 12 people moving around the warehouse floor, and the 6 of Gideon's men being contained in the loading dock area by people who'd responded to Marcus's call in time, just barely in time, and he thought about timing, about how much of his life had been decided by margins of minutes, by 40 seconds of counting in a car on a service road in the dark, by 12 digits spoken from memory on a cold floor. Nora put the first stitch in. He didn't make a sound. He looked at the phone screen and he breathed through it, measured, deliberate. The same breath control he used when the neurological episodes came, the same technique she had taught him, which was the deepest irony of the morning, and he was aware of it. "3 more, she said. He nodded. Danny cleared his throat from against the wall. "Is someone going to tell me what's happening?" "Not right now," Nora said without looking up. Danny subsided. Roman looked at Nora's face while she worked, the concentration in it, the absolute absence of performance, the way she was simply doing what needed to be done without requiring the moment to be anything other than what it was. He thought about the photograph in the envelope. He thought about what it had cost her to stand in the courtyard and watch her brother used as a prop in someone else's argument. He thought about the medical bag and the 11 pounds of clinical equipment that had caught Gideon's man across the face. "You planned that," he said. "The bag." She tied off the last stitch. "I assessed options when we came inside," she said. "The bag was the best available." She looked up at him. "I told you I notice exits." "You notice more than exits." "Occupational requirement," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, not exactly, but the territory adjacent to one. The expression that had been living at the edge of her face for 9 days and had never quite made it all the way through. She pressed a clean dressing over the stitches and taped it down with precise overlapping strips. She checked the edges. She put her hand briefly against his neck, pulse. She was checking his pulse, clinical reflex, automatic. And then she straightened up and began organizing the materials back into the bag. "The USB drive," she said. Roman reached into his breast pocket and put it on the desk. She looked at it. "What happens to it now?" "It goes to the other lieutenant," Roman said. "To Kane and the people who are still undecided. It makes the case against Gideon in terms they can evaluate. He looked at the drive. And it establishes that what comes next is restructuring, not succession, that I'm still here and still running this. And the warehouse people? Compensated, relocated if they want relocation. Loretta from accounts gets a raise she's been owed for 2 years. Nora was quiet for a moment, then, and the violent operations. Roman looked at her. The ones that produce situations like Danny's debt, she said, like the dryer. He was quiet. You've been building the legitimate side for years, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd been in his estate for 9 days. She'd listened and observed and filed information with the precision she applied to everything, and she had apparently arrived at accurate conclusions about the structure of what he ran and what it was moving toward. The freight companies, the logistics operations. You've been building toward something. I've been building toward something, Roman said. Then build toward it, she said. The rest of it, the Gideons and the Dryers and the Danny Bellamys, those are the product of everything you're already trying to leave behind. She picked up her bag. That's not me telling you how to run your life. She looked at him. That's me telling you what I see. The study was quiet. The warehouse feed on the phone showed 12 people who were all going to go home. Roman looked at the USB drive on the desk. 11 months of documentation. The architecture of Gideon's betrayal, and nested inside it, if you read it a different way, the architecture of what Roman had built and what it could become if the thing at the center of it changed. Outside, the November light was doing its flat gray work on the lake. Marcus appeared in the doorway. We need to move on the other lieutenants. Kane's office in 2 hours. He's already asking questions, which means the word is moving. Roman picked up the USB drive. He held it for a moment. 2 hours, he said. Marcus nodded and left. Danny, from the wall. Nora, can I? In a minute, she said, and she was looking at Roman. Roman was looking at the drive in his hand and then at his hand, and the tremor in his left fingers was there, smaller than it had been this morning, smaller than it had been 4 days ago. Harlan Fitch's adjusted schedule doing its iterative work, but present, a visible unsteadiness in the hand of the man who had run a Chicago operation for 26 years on the foundational principle that he needed nothing and no one that he couldn't control. He closed his fingers around the drive. He looked up at Nora. She was watching him with the same direct, level attention she'd had since the first morning, not reading into it, not managing it, just seeing it, the way she saw everything, clearly and without flinching and without needing it to be different from what it was. Stay close today, he said. She picked up her bag. I'm not going anywhere, she said. And the simplicity of it landed in the room without drama, without weight, just accurate. The plain statement of a fact that had apparently been true for longer than either of them had said it out loud. Roman put the drive back in his breast pocket, beside the empty envelope, and turned the wheelchair toward the door. His left shoulder pulled with every rotation of the wheel. He didn't slow down. The meeting with Kane happened in a conference room above a legitimate accounting firm in the Loop that Roman had owned through 3 shell companies for 6 years and used, maybe 4 times total, for situations that required neutral ground with controlled access. Kane was already there when Roman arrived. This was deliberate. Kane had gotten there first to establish that he wasn't being summoned, that he was choosing to be present, which was the kind of territorial communication that men in this business conducted through logistics rather than words. Roman understood it and didn't react to it, which was its own form of communication. He came in, positioned the wheelchair at the head of the table because the head of the table was where he sat, and he put the USB drive down in front of him and waited while Marcus closed the door. Ferraro was not there. Ferraro, Marcus had confirmed in the car, had gone quiet 3 hours ago, phone off, office empty, a car seen leaving his property in Oak Park at speed, which told Roman everything he needed to know about Ferraro's read on how this morning had resolved, and which side of it he wanted to be standing on when the accounting happened. Kane looked at the drive. He was a compact man in his early 60s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in rooms like this one, making calculations about which way the wind was blowing and positioning himself accordingly. He was not a man of conviction. He was a man of accurate assessment, which in Roman's world was its own form of reliability. Transactional loyalty was still loyalty, if you understood its limits. Ferraro ran, Kane said. Yes. That tells me something. It should, Roman said. Kane looked at the drive again. What's on it? Everything, Roman said. The bombing in January, the restaurant, the security override. 11 months of documentation that puts Gideon at the center of a coordinated attempt to take the organization through force. He paused. And Ferraro's name in 4 separate transactions that funded it. Kane absorbed this. His face moved through several calculations simultaneously, the way a man's face moves when he's running numbers in his head and doesn't have the luxury of a spreadsheet. What do you need from me? Kane said. The Eastern Freight accounts, Roman said. I need them frozen pending audit, and I need your sign-off on the transition protocol for the legitimate operations. He held Kane's eyes. Gideon's network gets dismantled. The people who were his by force or by fear get absorbed into the restructured operation or released cleanly. The people who were his by choice, he paused. That's a shorter list, and it resolves differently. And Gideon? Gideon answers to this organization, Roman said, internally, completely. No federal involvement, because federal involvement creates exposure for everyone at this table and every table adjacent to it. He kept his voice flat and final. That's not negotiable. Kane was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the drive. He looked at Roman, really looked, the way people sometimes did when they were trying to reconcile what they remembered with what was in front of them, measuring the distance between the man before January and the man in the wheelchair now, and trying to determine if that distance was weakness or something else entirely. Whatever he concluded, he reached across the table and picked up the drive. I'll need 48 hours, Kane said. You have 24, Roman said. Kane almost smiled. Not quite. 24, he said, and stood up and left without further negotiation, which was the most trustworthy thing he'd done in the meeting. A man who accepts terms without arguing them is a man who's already decided he's in. Marcus waited until the door closed. Ferraro. Find him, Roman said. Don't touch him until I say. I want to know where he lands before we decide what to do with him. He might run to Federal. If he had something to give Federal, he'd have given it already, Roman said. Ferraro's been in this operation for 16 years. He's as exposed as anyone. He turned the wheelchair toward the door. He's going to find a hole and get in it. Let him find it. Holes are easier to manage than moving targets. Marcus nodded. Roman stopped at the door. He put his hand on the frame, not leaning, just resting, a brief contact with the solidity of the wall. His shoulder had settled into a deep, sustained ache that the last 4 hours had done nothing to improve. His left hand, resting on the wheel of the chair, had the tremor again, less than this morning but present, the faithful companion of damage and exhaustion. Marcus, he said. Yeah. Marcus Reyes. He didn't turn around. Pull the file. I want to look at it. A pause. Roman, just pull it, Roman said. That's all. He went out to the car. Nora had stayed at the estate with Danny. When Roman came back at 4 in the afternoon, the two of them were in the kitchen, which was not a room Roman used for anything except coffee and the occasional early morning silence. Danny was sitting at the table with both hands around a mug, and Nora was at the counter, and they had clearly been talking and had stopped when they heard the car on the drive, the way a conversation stops when the thing being discussed is about to walk through the door. Roman came through and looked at Danny properly for the first time. He was younger looking than Roman had expected from the file, a softness in his face that hadn't hardened yet, despite everything, the specific unfinished quality of a person who hasn't fully arrived at who they're going to be. He had Nora's eyes, but not her stillness. Where she processed internally, he processed visibly. You could see the thoughts moving behind his face like weather. Mr. Vaylor, Danny said. Roman said, because he had no appetite for formality from someone who had spent the morning in his courtyard as a prop. Danny looked at his mug. I didn't know. Nora didn't tell me anything about... He stopped, started again. About any of this. I know she didn't. The debt, Danny said. I was working on it. I was making the payments. I know that too, Roman said. He moved the chair to the table, not sitting with them exactly, adjacent, the way you position yourself when you're part of a conversation but not entirely inside it. The debt is cleared. It's been cleared since Tuesday of last week. There's nothing outstanding, and there won't be. Danny looked up. That's not the gift, Roman said, before Danny could construct it as one. It's a correction. The interest structure on that account was predatory. The terms were designed to ensure repayment was impossible, and the people running it were operating in a way that I'm dismantling. He looked at Danny steadily. So it's a correction. You don't owe me anything for it. Danny looked at his sister. She was looking at Roman with an expression he couldn't fully read, the complex expression of someone who is receiving something they needed and are still deciding whether to accept it without condition. Okay, Danny said quietly. I have a question for you, Roman said. Danny waited. The position at the restaurant in Pilsen, Roman said. Line cook. Is that what you want to be doing? Danny frowned. It's what I do. I'm asking if it's what you want. Danny looked uncertain, the way people look when someone asks them a question they've stopped asking themselves. I did culinary courses, he said. 2 years. Before things got complicated. He looked at the mug. I used to think about running my own place. Small. Something real. He said it like it was embarrassing. I have 7 legitimate restaurant properties in the Chicago metropolitan area, Roman said. 3 of them need operational management at the kitchen level. The pay is real and the equity structure is fair. He paused. You'd have to actually work. I don't run charitable projects. Danny stared at him. Think about it, Roman said. You don't have to decide anything today. He turned the wheelchair toward the corridor. There's food if you're hungry. Marcus can arrange a car when you're ready to leave. He went toward his study. Behind him, in the kitchen, he heard Danny say something low to Nora that he didn't catch, and he heard Nora's response, which was 3 words. I told you. He didn't know what she'd told him, or when. He found to his mild surprise that he didn't need to. The crisis came at 9:40 in the evening. Roman was at his desk in the study, working through the transfer documentation that Kane's office had sent over. The legitimate operations framework, the restructured accounts, the separation of the freight companies from the enterprises that needed to disappear. And he was making notations in the margins in his precise handwriting, the right hand steady on the pen, the left hand flat on the desk because flat was steadier than resting. He became aware of something wrong the way he became aware of most things, not through a single signal, but through an accumulation of small ones. His vision had narrowed slightly at the periphery. There was a sound in his ears that wasn't the room, a thin, high frequency, like a signal at the edge of range. His left hand, flat on the desk, was vibrating, not the tremor, something else. He put the pen down. He pressed the intercom. He said Nora's name, and his voice came out differently than he'd intended, compressed, as though his chest had reduced its available space. She was in the study in 90 seconds, which meant she hadn't been far, which meant she'd been staying close in a way she hadn't announced. She looked at him and her face went into clinical mode in under a second. Not panic, the opposite of panic. The deliberate deceleration of a person narrowing their entire attention to the information in front of them. Talk to me, she said, already moving. Something's wrong, he said, which was not a sentence Roman Vaylor had said in a long time, in any context, to any person. The saying of it took something from him and he let it take it. She was already at his wrist. Pulse. She counted, her eyes on the clock on the bookshelf, her lips moving slightly. High, she said, really high. She looked at his face, his color, his eyes, the set of his jaw, and the particular quality of the sweat at his temple. Your blood pressure. I can feel it. I know. She got the cuff out of the bag, which was on the chair beside the desk, because she had left it there this afternoon and it had stayed, the bag migrating naturally to proximity the way she did. She wrapped the cuff, inflated it, watched the gauge with the focused attention of someone reading a language they're completely fluent in. The number she read made her exhale through her nose, controlled and quiet. How long have you been feeling this? She said. 40 minutes, maybe. She looked at him. You were going to wait it out. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Roman. She put both hands on the armrests of the wheelchair, bracketing him, leaning into his eye level. Not touching him, bracketing, making a frame that the conversation had to happen inside. I need you to listen to me. Your blood pressure is at a level that is dangerous. Not concerning, dangerous. It can cause a neurological event. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, he said. I need you to do exactly what I tell you, immediately and without arguing. She held his eyes. Can you do that? He looked at her. The thin, high sound was still in his ears, and the periphery of his vision was still narrowed, and the left hand on the desk was still vibrating, and Nora Bellamy was 12 inches from his face, asking him if he could let someone tell him what to do. Yes, he said. She moved fast, controlled fast, the economical speed of someone who knows where everything is and has already decided the sequence. She had medication out of the kit in seconds, the sublingual option that Harlan Fitch had included in the revised protocol for exactly this contingency, the one she'd explained to Roman on Thursday, and that he had, to his credit, actually listened to. Under your tongue, she said. Hold it. He did. She kept his wrist, counting, watching the clock, watching his face. Her other hand went to his shoulder, the uninjured one, and rested there, not gripping, just present, a point of contact that gave the nervous system something steady to reference when everything else was wrong. Breathe with me, she said. In through your nose, slow. He breathed. 4 counts. Hold 2. Out through your mouth. He breathed. She breathed with him. Not performatively, actually, her own chest moving in the rhythm she was asking him to follow, because the body follows what's near it, because that's what bodies do. 2 minutes. 3. Talk, she said. Say something. It doesn't matter what. He looked at her. I pulled the file on Marcus Reyes today, he said. His voice was steadier than 4 minutes ago. Small improvement, measurable. She kept breathing, kept the rhythm. Who is he? A man I removed from my operation 12 years ago. He was Gideon's half-brother. He paused. Breathed. I knew about him the same way I knew about Danny. I looked at the file tonight. She counted his pulse again. The number was still high, but the direction had changed. It was moving instead of fixed, which was the first good sign. What was in it? She said. A name, an address. He breathed. A daughter. She's 9 years old. He looked at the desk, at the transfer documents, the restructuring framework, all the paperwork of what came next. He had a daughter. I didn't know that. It was 12 years ago, and I made a decision, and I didn't look at the file. Nora was quiet. She was still holding his wrist, still counting, but she was listening. I'm not telling you I was wrong to do what I did, Roman said. I can't make that argument simply. It was the world I operated in and the rules I operated by, and I believed in those rules. He paused. But I looked at that file tonight, and there's a girl who's 9 years old, and I thought about everything I built, and what it cost, and who paid for it, and then my blood pressure. Did this, Nora said quietly. Did this, he agreed. She took the reading again. Better. Still not good, but the trajectory was correct. Don't move, she said, and reached for her phone and called Harlan Fitch, who answered on the 3rd ring, because she had apparently warned him earlier in the day that he might be needed, which meant she had anticipated this in some form, which meant she had been watching him more carefully than he'd realized even while watching her carefully. She described the numbers to Harlan. She listened. She said yes twice and nodded once at something he said and thanked him and hung up. He's going to be available by phone for the next 2 hours, she said. We're going to monitor every 15 minutes. If the next reading is higher instead of lower, we go to Northwestern, privacy considerations aside. She looked at Roman with the expression that was not negotiation, non-negotiable. If it goes lower, he said, then we stay here and we monitor through the night. He held her eyes. You'll stay. It wasn't a question quite. It was something between a question and a statement, the linguistic register of a person who is not used to assuming that someone will be there and is trying to ask without quite asking. I'll stay, she said. He leaned back in the wheelchair. He looked at the ceiling, the old plaster of the study ceiling, the crown molding that the estate had come with, and that Roman had never changed because he'd always had other things to change first. He looked at it, and he breathed in the rhythm she'd given him, and he let the room be what it was. Roman, Nora said. He looked down. She was sitting now. She'd pulled the chair close and sat down, which changed the geometry of the room, brought her to his level. She had the blood pressure cuff coiled in her hands, and she was looking at him with the direct, level attention that had been constant since the first morning, the attention that asked nothing of him except honesty. The girl, she said. The daughter. He looked at her. What do you want to do about it? She said. He was quiet for a long time. The clock on the bookshelf moved through almost a full minute. Find her, he said. Make sure she's all right. If she's not, Make sure she is. He paused. Anonymously. Nora held his eyes. Okay, she said. That doesn't fix it, he said. No, she agreed. It doesn't fix it. It's just the next right thing. He looked at his hands. The left one had finally stopped vibrating. It lay on his leg, still, the way hands lie still after a long effort. Not relaxed exactly, but finished. Whoa. The next reading was lower, and the one after that. By midnight, the numbers were at a level that Harlan Fitch, on the phone for the 11:15 check, described as manageable and cautiously acceptable, which in medical language meant the crisis had passed, and what remained was monitoring and rest and the slow work of the body returning to its operating baseline. Nora moved Roman to his room at 12:30. Not helping him exactly, he did the transition himself, the practiced movement from chair to bed that he'd developed over months of private rehearsal, but present, close, available. She set up the cuff on the nightstand. She put the emergency medication where he could reach it. She dimmed the lamp to the level that worked for sleep without being full dark, because she had noticed, in 9 days, that he didn't sleep in full dark. She noticed things. The chair, Roman said when she was about to leave. She looked back. He nodded at the chair near the window, the one she'd established herself in that first morning, the one that had become, over 9 days, functionally hers in this room. You should be comfortable, he said, if you're staying. She looked at him for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair. He closed his eyes. The room was quiet, in the way that rooms get quiet very late at night when the house has finally let go of the day. A deep, structural quiet, the silence that comes after everything has been spent. Outside, the lake was doing whatever the lake did at this hour, which Roman had never seen but had always known was there, the presence of it a constant at the edge of his property and his life. He slept. 3 weeks later, Marcus Reyes' daughter received an anonymous notification that a college fund had been established in her name at a bank in Springfield, administered by a legal trust with no named originator. The amount was substantial. The documentation was clean. The lawyer who set it up had worked for Roman Vaylor for 11 years and had never once been asked to explain his work to anyone. He wasn't asked to explain this either. So, Ferraro surfaced in Arizona, which was where Roman had expected him to surface. Warm, anonymous, the specific geography of a man who has decided that distance is safer than conflict. He had not gone to federal. He had, as Roman had predicted, found a hole and gotten in it. Marcus maintained a line of sight on him, quiet and unintrusive, the kind of surveillance that was simply knowing where a person was in case the information became relevant. It did not become relevant. Ferraro, by all accounts, was done. Up. Gideon's formal accounting within the organization took 11 days to complete. Roman ran it personally, which was unusual. These processes were typically delegated, managed at arm's length, through a structure designed to keep the outcome from looking personal, even when it was. Roman ran this one personally because it was personal, and because he had decided, at some point in the week since the morning in the study, that pretending otherwise was a form of dishonesty he was no longer interested in. The accounting was complete. The terms were severe and permanent. The organization closed around the gap Gideon had occupied the way a body closes around a wound, not without scar tissue, not without altered function in the area, but closed. At the end of the final session, Roman sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes. He thought about a half-brother he'd never known existed. He thought about 11 years of patience and a bomb on a Tuesday in January. He thought about the specific nature of hatred that disguises itself as ambition long enough to become indistinguishable from it, even to the person carrying it. He thought about what he owed and what he didn't, and the complicated territory between them. He didn't arrive at clean answers, because clean answers were for situations that were cleaner than this one. He arrived at the honest version of the situation, which was all you could do with something this complicated, and he carried it with him when he left the room, and he expected he would carry it for a long time. Some debts don't clear. They just become part of the weight you move through the world with, and you decide what to build in spite of it. The folder was on his desk when he came back to the estate on a Thursday afternoon in late November, 3 weeks and 4 days after the morning in the courtyard. Marcus had left it there. It was a legal folder, the kind that held executed documents, and it had a flag tab on the outside in Marcus's handwriting, "Review when ready." Roman opened it. Inside was the completed restructuring framework, The legitimate freight companies consolidated under a single holding entity. The predatory collection operations dissolved. The accounts cleanly separated. The personnel transitions documented. Kane's signature was on the operational transfer. 3 attorneys had signed the compliance certification. The work that Roman had been moving toward for 6 years, incrementally and carefully and without announcing the destination, was documented on 40 pages of legal paper as a completed fact. He read through it carefully. Then he put it down and sat with it. The empire he'd built through fear, the structure he'd maintained through 26 years of precision and control, and the specific discipline of a man who believed that needing anyone was weakness. It was still here, the physical assets, the people, the operations, but the thing at the center of it had changed. The violent machinery had been removed or was being removed. What remained was legitimate in a way that would hold under scrutiny, that didn't require the active management of threat to sustain itself. He had not done this because Nora asked him to. He had done it because it was what he'd been building toward, and the events of November had stripped away the last reasons he'd been using to delay the completion of it, and delay was no longer something he had patience for. But he had done it faster and more completely, and with less hesitation than he would have alone. He picked up the phone and called Marcus. "I need a second copy of this folder," he said, "and I need Nora in here when you bring it." She came in still in her work clothes. She'd been doing the afternoon session, the manual therapy on his lower back, that had been showing real improvement over 3 weeks, the scar tissue responding to consistent treatment, the way damage responds when it's finally attended to properly. She looked at the folder on the desk, then at Roman. "Sit down," he said. She sat in her chair, the one that was hers now, that had been hers since the night she'd stayed, that nobody had formally assigned but that everyone in the household had stopped using. Roman opened the folder. He turned it so she could see the documents, and he walked her through them, briefly, in the precise language he used for financial information, not explaining it down to her, explaining it across, which was the register he'd used with her from the beginning without fully realizing it, the register of someone who expects to be understood. She read the relevant pages herself. She was a careful reader. She'd noticed that about her early on, the way she read things fully rather than scanning for the parts that seemed important. She read the whole thing. She looked up. "It's done," he said. "Yes," she said. "The dryer is dissolved. The collection operations, all of them, not just the ones Gideon ran, dissolved or transferred to legitimate debt management services with regulatory compliance." He paused. "Situations like Danny's don't occur in this structure." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I want you to know," he said. "Because you said something in the kitchen of the safe house that I haven't stopped thinking about, and you deserve to know that it moved something." He held her eyes. "And because I'm about to show you something else and I wanted the context established first." He reached into the desk drawer and brought out a second folder. He set it in front of her. She looked at it. Inside was a legal contract, clean, formatted, executed on Roman's side. The subject was a 15% equity stake in the consolidated holding company, the legitimate entity that now owned the freight operations and the restaurant properties and the logistics network. The stake was assigned to a named beneficiary. Her name. Nora looked at the document for a long time. Long enough that Roman could observe the thing moving through her, not perform surprise, actual processing, the private machinery of a person encountering something they didn't construct a defense against because they didn't see it coming. She looked up. "This is not payment," Roman said. "And it's not—" He paused, locating the word carefully. "Charity. I've never done anything charitable in my life, and I'm not starting now." He looked at the document between them. "You walked into this house 9 days into a situation that was about to become dangerous, and you didn't walk out, and you made decisions under pressure that were better than the ones I would have made alone. And you have the specific kind of intelligence that this operation needs, as it becomes something different from what it was." He paused again. "I don't want you working for me anymore." Nora's expression shifted, fractionally, carefully. "I want you building with me," he said. The room was very quiet. Outside the study windows, the lake was visible, gray and wide and cold in the late November light, the surface of it moving in long, slow swells that came from somewhere further out and arrived at the shore, having traveled a long way to get there. Nora looked at the document. She looked at his hands on the desk, the right one steady, the left one with its small, faithful tremor, both of them present and accounted for in the afternoon light. She looked at him. "I want one thing," she said. He waited. "The girl," she said, "Reyes's daughter. I want to know she's all right. Not through Marcus, not through a lawyer. I want to know directly, once." She held his eyes. "Then I'll sign." Roman looked at her for a long moment. "Her name is Sophia," he said. "She's 9. She's in the 4th grade in Springfield, and she's doing well in school." He paused. "She's all right." The quiet settled. Nora reached across the desk. Roman had a pen already. He'd had it ready, the way he had things ready, the way he prepared for outcomes he was moving toward without naming them. He held it out. She took it. She turned to the signature line and she signed her name with the unhurried precision of someone who has made the decision fully before the pen hits the paper. She put the pen down. She sat back in her chair. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and the room held them both in the specific way rooms hold the aftermath of things. Not dramatic, not resolved into neatness, just containing what had happened with the plain structural patience of walls and light. Roman looked at the signed document. He thought about the Honda Civic that had died at his gate 9 days before any of this. $11 in a bank account, an eviction notice in the glove compartment, a woman who got out of the broken car and walked the last 12 feet because the alternative was not arriving. He thought about a crystal glass in 8 pieces and a wet patch on a wool rug, and someone telling him the rug was the bigger problem. He thought about what it had taken to let someone into the room where the real accounting happened, what it had cost and what it had returned, and how those two numbers didn't balance the way he'd always believed things needed to balance. "The rug," he said. Nora looked at him. "The one you broke the glass on," he said. The stain came out. She looked at him for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved, all the way through this time, not adjacent, fully through. And the expression that arrived on her face was not quite a smile and not quite something else, but something that had been building for 26 days and had finally found its way out, quiet and unhurried and entirely without performance. "Good," she said. Outside, the lake moved in its long gray swells. Roman's left hand rested on the desk. Still, for now. The folder with 2 signatures sat between them in the late afternoon light, and the study was warm, and the house around them was quiet, with the specific quality of a place that has been through something difficult and has come through it changed but intact. Not the same, not trying to be, just carrying forward what was real and leaving behind what wasn't. Neither of them moved to leave. There was no reason to hurry. The work ahead was long and the road into it was clear, and for the first time in longer than either of them could accurately remember, what waited on the other side of the next hour was not a threat to manage or a problem to contain, but simply the plain, difficult, unguaranteed possibility of something they were choosing to build. That was enough. That was, it turned out, the whole thing.